right. Welcome back to the Unstuck Movement. I am your host, Rob Z. These are true testimonies of breakthrough. Today, we have the incredible Bob Martin with us on the podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about meditation, mindfulness, resiliency, what flow is all about, and transformation in our lives. And Bob, I love to start things off with a powerful question, and I'm really curious.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
I'm excited to give it to you. So, what would you say is the work ethic of happiness?
The work ethic of happiness, I suppose it comes down to just the idea that there's not a magic wand that you can just, wave over yourself and all of a sudden you're happy and joyful and the like. It actually takes a little bit of work. It actually takes a little bit of intention, and it actually takes, a little bit of thought to be happy. And the world throws an awful lot at us. And a lot of it has to do with things that are disturbing in one way or another. And without getting too deep into brain science, it just tends to activate the right side of our brain and build up all kinds of neural pathways and all kinds of stuff over there. It makes it real strong, makes it real easy to feel negative. And if we want to really balance ourselves off, we have to intentionally build up that left side electrical activity. We have to build up the left side of our brain. And we do that by exposing ourselves to fun, to joy, to beautiful things, to having that sense of awe. And a lot of us, many of us, we just don't take the time to take 5 minutes to watch the birds feed. Take 5 minutes, really enjoy your cup of coffee, not just take it because you have to get waken up. Go out and watch the sun up and the like. But, for some folks, that takes some intentionality. And that's why I say there's a certain worth ethic to it. You have to decide you want to do that. And going out and doing it's nothing but fun. I think it's the wanting to do it that is what I call the work ethic.
Yeah, and also while you're doing it, making sure you're not somewhere else in your mind while you're doing it, right? That's one of the hardest parts.
Yeah.
Even if your intentions are in the right place, your mind might drift, and you got to stand guard.
Right. And we'll talk about that because that's exactly what meditation's all about. So
yeah,
we'll get into that.
And that's huge, man. I love that. So as we jump into this episode, I just want to welcome everybody here. This is the Unstuck Movement. So these stories are true testimonies to people who've had incredible breakthroughs in their lives. I tell these stories and bring amazing guests on to show you that breakthrough is possible for you, to break those chains that have been holding you back personally or professionally. We're sponsored by the Connected Leaders Academy. You can check out connectedleadersacademy.com, and also sponsored by the Pro Podcaster Academy. So if you're somebody who wants to launch your platform, you're somebody who wants to leave a lasting impact on people's lives and make incredible connections for yourself, for your business, and just for personally, meet incredible people and build yourself your own brand, I highly recommend you start your own podcast. You can do that by joining the wait list for the Pro Podcaster Academy at robzwentz.com. Bob Martin with us today went from defending clients during Miami's cocaine cowboy era to helping people find clarity and peace through meditation. Now a professor of wellness at Elon University, he combines wisdom, brain science, and psychology to break limiting beliefs and unlock a fulfilling life. So, Bob, I'm really happy to have you here today. And I'm curious, you mentioned about, the world activating the right side of our brain all the time. What is happening when we activate the left side of our brain? What is that left side of our brain doing?
Well, it's just interesting that we've all heard of the fight flight response, and we've heard and the nervous system that's associated with this is called the sympathetic nervous system, and that's where the fight flight response comes from. And we have to kind of remember that for a couple of million years we were hunter-gatherers, and that our bodies evolved for a really tough kind of environment. And these days the environment compared to that is a whole lot easier. It's not as much physical work, and in terms of fat and sugar and salt, there's more that we get in a McDonald's Happy Meal than we used to find in the jungle, in a month.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a kind of recognition that our bodies and our minds and the way that we do things, we're not really designed for the environment that we're living in.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry. The question was what was the
what is the we'll talk about the left side of our brain. What is it
yeah.
doing? Why do we need to tap into it?
So that's where the prefrontal cortex, that's our executive. That's where we make decisions from, and that's where we kind of do our strategic and tactical planning. And the right side of the brain is designed to hold our survival instincts and how we respond to things that create danger. I mean, it's important that, we have an idea of when we're being threatened and that we pay attention to solving it, whether it's a leak in the roof or whether it's a poisonous snake. As far as our body goes, it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It affects our body neurologically, and cortisol drops into our body, and eventually that cortisol will eat away at our nerve sheathings, and it's just not healthy. And we all know that it's not healthy. Everybody knows stress is not healthy, but there has to be a part of our brain that's concerned about that if we're going to survive. There also needs to be a part of our brain that houses the creative side, the side that feels connection, the side that wants me to be, with my tribe, the kind that the storytelling part, the artistic part, the part where those out of the box ideas come from when I'm not so focused. We need that also to survive. And where we want to try to be is a place where we have some balance, is really where we want to be. That, we're not falling over and succumbing, giving in, not having the gumption to speak up for ourselves. We don't want to be mealy mouthed. And at the same time, we don't want to be overly aggressive and have blood dripping from our fangs. So we're looking for some balance. And we actually, the brain scans today can actually look at your brain, and they can tell, whether, you're in balance or not based on how much electrical activity there is. And we can actually use our mind to physically change our brain. How does that map on for you?
Yeah, talk about that. How does our mind work with our brain?
So they did this terrific experiment, and this is like the gold standard. In London, the taxi cab drivers have to know every single alleyway. They have to know everything about London. And so they have to pass a very rigorous test before they're given a license to be a taxi driver. So they took pictures of the brains of these taxi drivers before they did their study. And especially they took pictures of the hippocampus. Actually, it's hippocampi, because there's two of them, but they took a picture, and then the people set about doing their studying, and then they took a picture of it afterwards. And they found that the organ itself, the physical organ itself, had grown longer, wider, taller, and even more importantly, thicker. It had become thicker. So they actually had used their mind to change the structure of their brain so that their brain would support the mind that they chose to have.
Wow.
If that kind of makes sense. So the good news about that is that you can do the same thing for things like habits, and you can do the same thing for happiness. You can set about, like I get up at 4:00 in the morning, and my wife thinks I'm nuts, and everybody thinks I'm crazy. But I got to tell you, I own the morning. Once the day starts, the day owns me. And I got to give in to whatever comes my way and respond to it and take care of stuff.
Yeah.
But from the time I wake up until the time my wife wakes up, I own that time. That's my time. And I get to do left brain stuff. I take my dogs out to a field that's nearby, and I throw the ball to them, and I pet them, and I play with my dogs, and I watch the sun come up, and I think about what the day is going to be like, and I always consider the fact that I'm about to trade a day of my life. And at 75, there's not as many days in front of me as there are behind me. But I decide I'm going to trade a day of my life for this day. I better leave something good in it, and I get to have all those beautiful thoughts. I get to appreciate when it's cold, and appreciate when it's warm, and appreciate the sun come up. So I actively take part, in building that up. And now, if I can just say this also, I think this is an important piece. If you build up, this might be a little bit too much brain science, I don't know, but you build up neural pathways, and neurons that fire together wire together. Every time that you have a thought about something, you have an electrical impulse going through your brain, and certain neurons fire, and they wire together, and they start to form pathways.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the same way a light bulb has a very, very thin filament, and it resists electricity because it's so thin, so therefore it gets hot and it gives off light. Well, the emotional sensation of having a thin neural pathway is, oh, I don't like math. Oh, that's hard for me to think about. Or I don't like to think about that. It just feels like it's hard to think about it. It literally feels tough to think about it. But when you build up the neural pathway, and now you have a copper wire going through the light bulb, it ain't going to light up because there's no resistance. The electric just flow, and that feels like, yeah, I like to do that. I like to do puzzles. I'm great at crosswords. That's what that feels like. So you can actually use your brain, and that's where I talk about the work ethic of happiness, understanding, that the actions that I take in my life are actually going to affect my brain in such a way that it is going to support the life that I choose I want to have. Gives me a lot of motivation to want to surround myself with beauty.
Mm-hmm. It's a really good way of explaining that too, man. Does
that make sense?
Yeah, of course it makes sense. And I always thought the neural pathways, I always like to use the analogy of like sled riding, because you have a flat, it snows out and the snow's flat, and you try to go down the hill. It's kind of difficult at first.
Right.
Second time a little easier, third time easier, fourth time a lot easier, right? And then you built like this really strong path that's automatic. And so normally, like you were saying, I think you were saying this earlier at the beginning, like most of the input that we get in life is right brain response. Like we have to respond to things, respond to fear and things like that. And life's sort of geared in that direction by default. I think you can say that, right? And so we have a lot of neural pathways that we didn't choose to put in that are just kind of there. And so we have to, like you're saying, the work ethic of happiness, you have to put the work in, and that's painful. It's painful to think new things.
It is
hard, right?
It is.
It's like physically, like you can feel the gears grinding in your head as you're doing it. So one of the ones for me, it's funny, is decision making. Like I'm making it a goal of mine to become a better decision maker. My wife's really good at it. She makes quick decisions, and they're not always perfect, but they always lead to a good outcome because she took action. And so I caught myself yesterday fumbling through a decision that actually screwed up our day a little bit and like threw things off because I couldn't make a decision quick enough. And I think that for me, that's one I've been working on, a strong neural pathways to quick decision making. And knowing that I can tweak things from there, but I've got to decide something.
Right.
So I really love that. That's really good. And I wanted to bring up, you mentioned awe, right? And whenever you were filling out information for this episode, I love to ask the question, a life lesson that had a big impact on you. And your answer was super simple. You said experiencing awe. And I want to know what that means. What does that mean? Experiencing awe.
Yeah. So awe it's interesting. There are some places, and if you've never gone to the Greater Good Science Center, the GGSC online, you must. because that all of the research that's done on happiness and creating the life that you want to live, the science, all the science around that is being done in Berkeley. And anybody that has anything to do with positive psychology or neuroplasticity, anybody that's got anything to do with that, they work out of the Greater Good Science Center. And the stuff that they put out online is just, absolutely wonderful. And it just so happens that right now a big subject of investigation, and they're doing a lot of research around awe. And one of the things that they have discovered is that awe is like the positive, the mirror image of PTSD. Like when something tragic and traumatic happens to you, it changes your brain structure immediately. There is an immediate change that occurs, whap, and then, you're not the same afterwards. And they find that awe does the same thing on a positive level, except for one thing. They found that when it comes to a traumatic incident, because our survival instinct is the strongest instinct that we have, it can impact our brain and it can have an immense effect immediately. Whereas awe is more subtle. Awe is almost something we can choose to have. So when you experience awe, it's important to remember it, to relive it in your mind, to remember it, and to emphasize it and work with it so that those neural pathways have a chance to establish themselves. But to get to your question, what is awe? For me, awe is that, in the Christian world, they talk about thin spaces. They talk about these sensations you have where you feel like there's just this very thin membrane that is separating you from the divine. And I think that that's just such a wonderful way of thinking about it. It's almost as if you lose your whole sense of ego. You're not there. You're in the moment. You're in a sunset. You see the sunset and it washes over you to such an extent that it's almost as if you disappear and you are the sunset. And it doesn't have to come with just sunsets. The other day I was flying back from Costa Rica, and I was in one of these long extended planes sitting up in the front, not first class or anything, just I happened to be seated in one of the front rows, and I had to go to the bathroom. I had to walk all the way to the back of the plane. And I just saw, I walked by row after row after row of all of these people sitting 6 across, all of them flying 30,000 feet in the air. And I thought of how in the movies, whenever the captain is in trouble, or the pilot, they radio in, they say, we have 112 souls aboard. And I just realized in that moment that these were all souls, and I got it. I really washed over me what that must feel like to be in charge of, a vehicle like that and have 120 souls aboard. And something washed over me, and I just felt connected to those folks. And there was a sensation in my chest that I was just one of them for the moment. Just that moment, a sense of almost wanting to cry but not quite there, and a sense of loving the the flight attendant, a sense of loving the flight attendant for her commitment to our safety. It was the thinking. I'm not going to say that it lasted so long. Eventually I got to the bathroom and I did what I needed to do. I went back to my seat, but there was that moment there of feeling completely connected to my surrounding. And I would say that was a sensation of awe.
And so what you were saying is it's important to go back and relive that moment over and over again. To go back and that makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you, so when I think of awe, I always think of like my wife and I had stayed at this Airbnb, And the Airbnb, it was like almost spring, so there was like still like kind of a frost in the morning, but it was like a little bit warmer, and the sun was coming up over this hill, and there were like sheep grazing on the hill.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those things like where you can't stop looking at it.
Right.
Like I looked at it, and it was like I couldn't fill myself up with how like magnificent it was. You know, it was super simple. There's nothing like spectacular. Like it was just such a beautiful landscape, and I couldn't stop looking at it. And like no matter how much I looked at it, it's like I wasn't getting all of it. And I felt like, is that a sense of awe?
Yeah,
Would you
absolutely.
say?
Absolutely.
What about whenever
you weren't thinking about yourself? I mean,
right.
You weren't thinking about, what you had to do 2 hours from then, or, what your plans were for the day. I mean, you were there with the sheep.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yes. It's funny, man. One of the things that always comes up to me, and I for some reason bring this up a lot, but cutting the grass. There's something about when you cut the grass, and I'll stare at my yard for a half an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all I did was cut the grass, but there's something about it. It looks so like amazing. I'll just stare at it. Right. And you get this sense of accomplishment.
It smells so good.
Yeah, it smells so good. Dead grass smells good.
Yeah,
right. Cut grass.
Yeah.
But you're like killing it kind of. It's a weird, like it's giving off that smell because you're cutting it. Yeah, it's interesting. That'll give me like a sense of like just kind of staring at it and appreciating it. So I love that, because that is something that we can carry around with us and look for awe throughout the day. Like you said, on that airplane, you because you're looking for it, right? You're going to see it more often, and we change our perspective to look for these sorts of things, because life can pass us by so quickly.
Oh, so quickly. Can I go back to something that you mentioned about decision making?
Oh yeah.
So this is just something that, as you mentioned it, I thought about when I was in social work school. I did a thesis on transactional analysis, and in transactional analysis, they talk about a lot of the underpinnings of, we know, the Briggs-Myers test, that thing, that extroverted, introverted, etc. And then there's the people that are process oriented, and the people that are J's, or judgment oriented. It doesn't really mean judgment. They just want to have an answer. They want to get to an answer, and it's a decision. And one of the things I just I want to pass it on to you. One of the things I learned that was very helpful, because I'm also one who is very hesitant to make decisions. I overthink them, or I underthink them, and the way that they defined it really sunk in, and it made a difference to me, is that people that are J's, that tend to want to get the decision made, right or wrong, I want to get it done and get it off my desk. They generally feel the anxiety of the decision prior to making the decision, and the decision relieves them of the anxiety. Whereas P's, who like the process, their anxiety generally starts when they make the decision. And they start thinking about whether it was the right decision or the wrong decision. It's not like it gets off our desk. That's when I start worrying about it. And so looking at it from where the anxiety is really helped me to realize that it was really something that was just kind of conjured up in my consciousness. And
how did that help change things for you?
Well, it helped change things, because when a decision needed to be made, and on one level, I knew that it needed to be made, but I felt anxious about making it, I could say to myself, oh, that's just my anxiety. Once you recognize it and you know what it is, you kind of disempower it.
Yeah. Name it, and it can.
You name it, and then that's all it is. It's just that. And so you can work through it. You can punch through it more easily.
Oh, okay. That's good advice. I appreciate that. So we're going to take a pause here, 1 minute, to shout out the sponsor of the show. When I come back, though, we haven't talked about your story, and I'm really curious about this. Like, how does a trial lawyer in Miami's cocaine Cowboys era, right, become a meditation expert? How does that path happen for you? We'll talk about that in 1 minute. Are you struggling to make consistent, valuable content for yourself? Do you want to have an efficient and effective way to create content that attracts the people that you want to connect with in life, the people you want to build relationships with in business? Do you want to be the go-to authority at what you do, at what you're great at? Would it be helpful for you if you had a platform that connects you to incredible people in your industry? The kind of platform that gets you leads and lands you clients without you having to beat down anybody's door or blow up anybody's inbox. Whether you're already creating content or you're desiring to start and it's something that's been kind of burning inside of you for a while, I urge you and encourage you to check out the Pro Podcaster Academy. Get started right now. Join the waitlist at robzwentz.com.
Hi, my name is Jose Escobar, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Connected Leaders Academy. We're a growing tribe, a community of entrepreneurs all over the world globally. If you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to grow personally and professionally, scale your influence, develop your skill sets, move the needle in your business, more clients, more money, more profit, the bottom line. And of course, grow your circle and your network like never before. Join the Connected Leaders Academy today. Check me out on Instagram and on Facebook, the @ JASCO25. We look forward to having you join us. Take care.
So Bob, I'm loving this conversation. Really good. I want to know about you though. How does this happen for you in your life? Trial lawyer to meditation expert. How, why?
I suppose the facts, just like everyone's facts, are unique, but the why is probably pretty common. And it was that I was doing very well in my profession. I was a criminal defense attorney, and I was circulating at that level where the Colombians and the Italians and the Haitians and the Cubans were all talking to each other, the highest levels. And I was making hand over fist money and great respect from the courts. And my personal life it sucked. I was doing too much of that. They called it the cocaine cowboy days for a reason. My behaviors were a little extreme. My family is falling apart. My wife was having trouble with alcohol. My kid was beginning to become an anorexic, and it was a knee moment. It's when you get down on your knees and you say, "I need some help." And meanwhile, you got to maintain the front of being the effective, efficient, successful lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
I was seeing a therapist, and it's probably the subject of a whole podcast, but there came a time when, because of one question and one way that he answered it, I discovered that he was one of the top students and disciples, and he was the English language editor for a 72nd generation Taoist priest from the Shaolin Temple.
Wow.
Now,
I'm curious, real quick, because I love questions and finding out, like, sometimes a single question can lead to like your life changing. What was the question you asked?
I had already paid off my house. I was 32 years old. I was spending money hand over foot as fast as I was making it. And I had invested in some business, which I was convinced was going to make me $1 billion. And it was going down the tubes because I was going down the tubes. And my question to him was, should I refinance my house to keep this thing going?
Mm.
And the way that he answered it was by grabbing some coins and throwing them on the table a variety of times, grabbing them, shaking them, throwing them on the table, doing some math, coming up with some stuff. And he eventually came up with a number, let's say it was 32. And he got this big book from behind him, and he opened it up to that chapter. And the title of the chapter was Retreat. And those days, $65 was a lot of money to pay a therapist. And now I got a soothsayer, not a therapist. So I cursed him out and I stomped out. But it was like that word got tattooed on my forehead. And I knew that I had to back away from some of the craziness if I was going to, save my life and my family and the like. So I backed away, and then I, with tail between my legs, came back to him in a couple of weeks, and I said, "Well, what was that you did?" And he goes, "Well, that's a Taoist practice called I Ching, or the I Ching." And I said, "What's that?" And he started to explain Taoism to me. And that's when I found out who he was and what his relation to Master Watching Ni was. And then the next week, Watching Ni came from China, came to Miami. And I am sure that you have at some point in your life run into somebody. I don't want to sound maudlin here, or sappy, but you run into somebody and all you want to do is sit at their feet and say, I want what you got. And this was that guy. And I had not ever grown up with any kind of spiritual training or religious family. And all of a sudden, somebody was saying, "Hey, I got an operating manual for how to live life. Are you interested?" And I go, "Yeah, I am. I'm interested." And so I started studying under Master Ni and George and our little Taoist group for 6 years. And Taoism doesn't have a lot to do with meditation, but when I moved to North Carolina, there's not a lot of Taoists, so I started going to Buddhist temples. They're like sisters. Taoism and Buddhism are like sisters. And that's where I started to pick up meditation.
That's really interesting. How I'm always curious, like, because you were living such a different lifestyle, things were going the wrong way. You start, this all kind of reveals itself to you. How did things start to change there in the early, weeks, months, maybe even years that transitioned you out of being this high level lawyer in these, these kind of crazy times in Miami, right? Because, like you said, you still had to put on this front of this person that you had created for yourself, yet you were changing internally. So how did that start to affect the things in your life?
Yeah. So something very fortunate about my relationship with these people, the mob, so to speak, was that we all were of the agreement that I didn't need to do anything unethical or anything illegal, because it was important to them that, and I wasn't consigliere. I wasn't on the inside. I was just getting referrals of the mules and the mid-management, the wholesalers, and that kind of thing. And they all agreed, and I agreed. And we said, "Look, you want to have a lawyer whose word is gold in the courtroom and is respected by the courts." And so I never really had to compromise my professional values in order to do the work. So that was just a very fortunate thing. So it allowed me to continue doing the work that I was doing, even while I was learning these new ways and these new perceptions, these new ways of looking at things. And Taoism is a skill building. It's really a skill building process. It's not God-based at all. And so it's not a religion. You can't call it a religion or even come close to calling it a religion. You might say that it's a philosophy, but we asked Master Ni once why they called him master, and he says because he said, chuckled, and he says, "Well, because I'm a master of life," and chuckled and walked away. And eventually we cornered him and said, "Well, what does it mean to be masterful in life?" And all of a sudden he got serious, and he didn't say much, but this is what he said. He said, "When you can learn how to interfere the least and have the greatest impact, you have mastered life."
Wow.
And that is what Taoism teaches. It teaches how to recognize the flow that you're in, because everybody says, I want to go with the flow, and that's great. And it certainly want to go downstream. You don't want to paddle upstream, but downstream, it could be calm water, but it also could be white water, and it could be going towards a waterfall, and it could be a flood that's sweeping your house away. I mean, just going downstream doesn't mean it's la 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 la. Life is but a dream.
Yeah.
So what Taoism teaches you is it teaches you to recognize the nature of the stream that you're in, and then using wisdom and interest in introspection and developing and learning and doing the practices, you learn the most effective, efficient ways to align yourself with that energy so that you can have the least interference and the greatest impact.
Yeah.
So
that's such a great statement. It's even so hard to wrap your head around, right? Because it's and I understand, like, intellectually what it means. The least interference would have having the greatest impact, but to understand how to not interfere is a whole different, and to be aware enough to not interfere.
Yeah,
right.
In the West we say work harder, work smarter, not harder.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the same thing.
Yeah.
But it's just the metaphor that I like to use is swimming into shore from being out in the ocean. Now, if you are not aware of your surroundings, then you're going to panic and probably drown. If you're a little bit aware of your surroundings, then what you might do is you might say, well, I need to swim to shore, so I'm going to set off, and we try to pace myself, but I'm swimming ashore. And that'll get you to shore, but you might be exhausted when you get there. If you are more aware of your surroundings, you'll notice that at times the tide is flowing towards the shore, and at times it's flowing away from the shore. So if you align yourself with that, then when it's going towards the shore, you're going to swim like heck. You're going to use all of the energy that you have, because that's the time to move. But when it goes against you, well, you don't want to just sit on your butt and get swept out to sea. And at the same time, you don't want to waste energy and fight it. So you find just that place where you can kind of rest and conserve your energy, but just use enough to stay steady, to hold your place. And then when the tide changes and it goes back towards shore, swim like heck. And then hold and swim like heck. And then when you get to shore, you're probably not going to be exhausted and you will have achieved your goal. So if I am in a meeting, if I'm in a company meeting and I've got a great idea and I want to share it, and I start and I kind of notice that there's just not an opening, that the energy is not there, there's not a receptivity. Instead of trying to get everybody's attention and fighting against the tide, just maybe hold, back away, dim your light a little bit, and use the time effectively to polish your presentation. Because eventually people are going to turn to you and say, now, what was it that you wanted to say? Now they're open. Now you can move forward. And now you're polished, so you can say it as effectively and as efficiently as possible because you took in the time to polish it and you have the opening. So you're going to interfere the littlest as possible, yet you're going to have the greatest impact. So Master Nee said that all of life, can be lived like that. The entirety of life can be lived like that. And he pointed us in the direction, and I promise you I'm still working on getting there.
Yeah, we are, right? Except for him.
Well, if you go to a monastery, and you can practice it day in and day out for 20 years, I guess you can get there.
Yeah. And I think the question, which is the title of this episode, what it really means to be mindful, I think you just answered it. It's following the tide, following the flow, and knowing how to not resist it and go with it, and have the biggest, and that's where you're going to have the biggest breakthroughs. You're going to have the most impact is when you go with it.
Right.
That's
And
really good.
And I would say that the practice of mindfulness or meditation is also a skill building practice. I mean, the most common conversation that I have around meditation goes something like this. Oh, you're a meditation teacher. Yeah, I really need meditation. I could really use that meditation. Boy, I tell you, I could really use it, but I can't do it. I tried once. I sat down and I tried to quiet my mind and everything else. My mind just went nuts, and all those thoughts came into my head, and I'll just never be able to do that. I'll never be able to quiet my mind. My mind's just nuts. That's the most common conversation that I have.
Yeah.
And my mind, after 20 years of practice, goes nuts. Just so you know. It still goes nuts, and you're never going to stop it from going nuts. You know, I mean, it is true that there's probably a little bit more space between my thoughts than there used to be, but that's not why you meditate. You don't meditate for that purpose. What it's about, what meditation is really about, it's about learning to become skillful in managing your thinking. It's not thinking. It's learning how to manage your thinking. And we do that. Well, we've all had this experience. We're listening to somebody, and then all of a sudden, it's like our brain says, "Psst, hey, you're not listening anymore." You know, you faded away and you're thinking about whether you left the stove on or what you got to do for lunch or meeting your wife or the deadline. And, you know, you blah, 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 blah. Your mind's gone. It's gone nuts. And, but at some point, your mind does remind you that your initial intention was to listen to the fella.
Yeah.
It does that. And when it does that, it's funny, but we all have this little sensation of a startle. It's like a little startling feeling, like not physically like we show it, but it's like internally there's this little, oh, I just realized I'm not listening. And we call that waking up. That's waking up. Otherwise, before that, I was lost in a fog of rumination and projection. Then I woke up, and now I'm attending to my thinking. Now I'm aware of and I'm attending to my thinking, and I'm becoming intentional. And the first thing that happens is there's a flood of judgments. I should have been listening to him. Now, how am I going to get him to say what he said? And I don't want to be rude. And he's going to think that I was rude because I wasn't listening. There's this flood of judgments. And yeah, okay. So after a while, you know, you come up with every possible judgment you can have. And then there's no more judgments to have, and then you decide.
And now you're still not paying attention.
Still not paying attention.
Now you're just judging yourself.
Now you're judging yourself. Exactly. But then at some point you go back and you start listening again. And that is what we do when we meditate. It's exactly what we do. So there's nothing that's weird or woo-wee about it, except we just say that I'm going to pay attention to this candle, or I'm going to pay attention to this breath. And then our mind goes off. You know, and the blah, 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 and all that. And then at some point, we notice that we're not paying attention to the candle. And then there's the flood of judgments. And then we go back to pay attention to the candle again. And then our mind goes off again. And we go through the process again. And then our mind goes off again. And we go through the process again. You say, well, why would I want to do that? What benefit is there to that? So the benefit is I am beginning now, as we start doing this in the first couple of weeks, I'm beginning to get a feeling for what it feels like to be attending to my thinking and what it feels like to be lost in the fog. I'm actually becoming aware of something that's been happening to me naturally all my life, but now I am intentionally becoming aware of it. And at some point, I start listening to all of those judgments. After I do this 10 or 15 times, and I mean in one session, I might do it 10 or 15 times, I start to get bored, literally start to get bored. Like I've heard these judgments before and now they become boring. And the funny thing about your mind is you can't make yourself not have the judgment. You can't. It's impossible. Right. You can't say, I'm not going to do that. But if you become bored of it, they kind of go away on their own. It's like, yeah, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and they kind of go away. And so what you notice is that your judging begins to just start going down, not out of anything that you intended it to do. It just starts happening. And
because you're not giving it power anymore, right? The reason the judgment is so strong is because you are reinforcing it by resisting it. You don't like it, so you're giving it attention, so it sticks around more. The less attention it has, the less resistance you give it, the easier it is for it to be like, oh, okay.
Precisely. Exactly. Well said. Yes, exactly. And it's like your judgment is like a little bratty kid that just wants to bother you and get some attention. And if you don't give it any attention, it goes off somewhere else and plays somewhere else.
Yeah. And then it'll come back again later on.
It'll come back later on. And it'll come back later on and try to bug you again. And you just do the same thing and it goes away again. And it's skill building. It's just the same thing that you get better as a parent. Hopefully, the more you parent, you realize, what works and what doesn't work. And eventually, and the real key to it is at some point, you realize the truth of this statement. And the way that I'm just going to take an aside, the way that I teach meditation is I use a mechanism that was developed at Duke University for years in development and then years of research. And I can now say to somebody, instead of saying like, I learned how to be a meditation teacher over a 2-year intense program. Nobody's going to do that. You have to be crazy to commit to it. But if I say to you, if you give me 5 weeks and meet with me for 1 hour a week for 5 weeks, and you promise to practice for 10 minutes a day, that's all I'm asking. 1 hour a week for 5 weeks, practice 10 minutes a day. I'll give you an app and you listen to your 10 minutes of guided meditation and then log what you're feeling at the end, whatever it is that you're feeling. Mm-hmm. That log, thanks to Duke's infrastructure, will come to my dashboard. And every morning I get up and I answer that log. I will send you back some coaching. So unlike going to see somebody once a week and then developing bad habits for a week before you see him again, I am with you every single day. And I might get a log that says, this was a terrible meditation. There was a dog barking and he really distracted me. And he kept, the more he barked, the angrier I got. And then finally the bell rang and I didn't meditate at all. It was terrible. So I might write back. I get that the next day. And before they meditate again, they'll get something from me. So, well, wait a minute. You say it was terrible, but look at all the data you developed about who you are. Mm-hmm. You notice the growing sensation of annoyance as time went on. You said the dog started barking and I got more and more annoyed so you notice that by not satisfying your annoyment, it grew. You notice this. And now you have that piece of data. You notice that time seemed to compress because you said all of a sudden it was over. So, I mean, look at all of the data that you got about how you deal with conflict here. And you're aware of it and you were able to log it. And now it's part of your database. I think that was a great session.
Yeah, it's a really good point because those are all lessons and those are all parts of meditation, observing and learning about yourself.
Exactly.
And it's especially what I guess it's just the right or wrong. I'm either doing this right or I'm doing it wrong. But if you're practicing meditation, you're doing it right.
Yes.
even if you feel like it's totally wrong.
Yes.
Right? You're
Yes.
doing something.
Yes.
We have to wrap
Absolutely.
this thing up, Bob. That's really good stuff, and
All right.
I'd love to talk to you more, but I
Okay.
have to end this episode. This has been really good. I want to encourage people, if they want to find out more about you, you have a free ebook they can download. What is meditation anyway? At awiseandhappylife.com. Anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, a lot of people ask me a lot of questions about meditation. I decided to just make it easy for myself. I wrote it all down in a 40-page book. So all the questions you might have, all the answers are there, plus resources. You can get the book, and there'll be plenty of options if you want to go on and explore more.
I love it. Very cool. So make sure you get that at awiseandhappylife.com. Remember, if you want to be the authority in your space and launch your platform, I encourage you to go to robzwentz.com. Bob, anything you want to leave the audience with before we sign off?
You're not your thoughts. You're so much more. You're so much more.
I love it. We'll leave it with that. Wise words from Bob Martin. Thank you, sir. Another true testimony of breakthrough. Until next time, this has been the Unstuck Movement.